The history of pulse diagnosis.
Pulse diagnosis was not exclusive to Chinese medicine. It was an important diagnostic system in ancient Greek medicine, Egyptian and Persian medicine, Indian Ayurveda, and Tibetan medicine. In fact, it's fair to say that there is no traditional medical system that didn't use pulse diagnosis in their practice. Particularly, the pulse diagnosis in Indian Ayurvedic medicine is remarkably similar to that of Chinese medicine. Even in Europe, pulse diagnosis was studied and devices were created to record pulse waves up until the 19th century. 1. Ancient Egypt. Ancient Egyptian medicine is one of the oldest documented medical systems in the world, with pulse diagnosis playing a crucial role in understanding a patient's health and determining the appropriate course of treatment. Egyptian physicians would palpate the radial artery at the wrist, assessing the pulse's rate, rhythm, and quality to gain insights into the individual's health. Medical texts such as the Ebers Papyrus and the Edwin Smith Papyrus provide evidence of pulse diagnosis techniques in ancient Egyptian medicine. The heart and pulse in ancient Egyptian medicine. Ancient Egyptian doctors recognized the importance of the pulse and its association with the function of the heart. They believed that the heart gives rise to vessels that can be palpated and that the heart speaks out of every limb. This notion is mentioned in the Papyrus Ebers, a medical text written about 3,500 years ago, consisting of 108 pages of extracts drawn from different sources and compiled by scribes. Palpation of the pulse was an essential diagnostic tool in ancient Egyptian medicine, which defined the heart as the center of the blood supply, with vessels attached for every part of the body. It is undisputed that the ancient Egyptians were the first to describe the relationship between heartbeat and peripheral pulse. During palpation, they would count the pulse, often using an earthenware vessel that acted as a clock to measure the pulse rate. The vessel had a tiny hole at the bottom, allowing water to drip, drop by drop. The pulse rate was determined by correlating it with the drops of water escaping from the vessel. This innovative method enabled physicians to measure the pulse rate accurately and consistently.
Ancient Greek physicians such as Herophilus, an eminent physician from Alexandria, observed 4 characteristics of the pulse: size, frequency, strength, and rhythm. Herophilus believed that the pulse had a musical rhythm and developed a system for counting the pulse rate. He constructed a portable water clock or clepsydra, which contained a specified amount of water to count the pulse rate of his patients. Although Herophilus recognized the importance of determining the pulse rate, his followers did not continue this particular aspect of his studies, and pulse rate remained relatively unexplored until the 15th century.
So this is a water clock Herophilus used to measure pulse rate.
Erasistratus, a contemporary of Herophilus, also made significant contributions to the understanding of pulse diagnosis. Galen, a 2nd century Greek physician and philosopher, reported that Erasistratus came very close to understanding circulation. Erasistratus observed that the heart and arteries did not move at the same instant, with arteries dilating while the heart contracted and vice versa. He recognized that the motion of the arteries followed the contraction of the myocardium. However, he incorrectly assumed that the dilation of arteries was due to the movement of pneuma along the course of the arteries, as Greeks believed that arteries contained pneuma while veins contained blood. Herophilus's student Galen and generations of medieval physicians who studied Galen's writings questioned what terms such as size meant under the fingertips. They also debated how to teach students to feel subtle variations in rhythm and frequency.
Let's take a look at the specific word, pneuma. Pneuma is sometimes translated into qi. So pneuma originally means air or spirit. The word originated from pneuma is common in medical field, like likewise pneumonia or pneumothorax. So these days, pneumo, that morpheme, is interchangeably used with pulmo, which means lung. But actually, in ancient Greek, pneuma meant very similar counterpart with chi in TCM. That great Galenus, Galen, he was also known as a great master of pulse diagnosis, expressed his trouble understanding the pulse diagnosis. For many years, I was doubtful about clearly understanding the movement of pulse by touch. I shelved the question until such a time I could learn enough to fill the gap in my knowledge. After that, after kind of enlightenment, the doors of the pulse were open to me. So this description implies the difficulty of mastering pulse diagnosis. In Greek Roman tradition, there was a couple of specialized books about the pulse diagnosis. And these books support how importantly ancient Greek and Roman people considered pulse diagnosis as an essential medical procedure. How about Persia?
In ancient Persia, pulse diagnosis was a fundamental aspect of the traditional medical system known as Unani medicine. Renowned Persian physicians like Ibn Sina and Rhazes emphasized the importance of pulse examination in their medical treatises, such as the Canon of Medicine.
So interestingly, Unani means Greek people. So sometimes people think Persian pulse diagnosis is something influenced by traditional Chinese medicine, but it seems like more influenced by ancient Greek medicine. And Ibn Sina's work is actually mostly Galenus and Hippocrates.
They believed that the pulse could reveal information about the body's humoral balance, organ functioning, and overall health. Persian physicians assessed the pulse's rate, rhythm, depth, and quality, and correlated their findings with the patient's symptoms and constitution. Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna in Europe, was one of the most outstanding scholars dealing with pulsology. He revolutionized the practice of pulse diagnosis. His works, particularly the Canon of Medicine, were instrumental in synthesizing and expanding upon the Greek and Arabic knowledge available during his time. Ibn Sina's detailed studies included the dynamics of pulse due to various diseases, and his descriptions of pulse types were so detailed that they could differentiate conditions that were otherwise clinically similar. His method of feeling the pulse as a lie detector. One story claims Ibn Sina even used the pulse as a sort of lie detector. He questioned the Sultan's wife while feeling her wrist. From her pulse agitations, he discovered she was secretly lovesick over someone other than her husband. Similar stories of the use of pulse reading for medical sleuthing were told about other famous doctors from different traditions, including Greek physician Erasistratus. The skill of Arabic doctors at reading the patient's pulse was illustrated in stories. One tells of a famous physician who claimed he did not even have to touch the patient. Instead, he felt the vibrations of string tied around the patient's pulse. A powerful ruler tested him, tying string to the wrist of a cow hidden behind a curtain. The unfazed physician announced his diagnosis. All this creature needs is grass. According to Ibn Sina's reports, 10 parameters are applied for detecting the pulse, including size, speed, strength or weakness, shortness or length of pulse intervals, softness or hardness, similarity or dissimilarity, regularity or irregularity in diverse pulses, and harmony related to the musical nature of the pulse. Interestingly, combining 2 or more of these parameters results in compound pulses. Ibn Sina mentioned 13 different types of compound pulses, such as massive pulse, deer pulse, wavy pulse, vermicular pulse, and serrate or saw-like pulse.
And this kind of differentiation with the quality profiles of the pulse is common between Persia, Greek, and also China, and Ayurvedic medicine.
Pulse diagnosis, a critical diagnostic tool in traditional medicine systems, has been practiced in India as part of the ancient Ayurvedic medical system. Known as Nadi Pariksha, pulse diagnosis in Ayurveda helps practitioners understand a patient's prakriti and the balance of the three doshas, which are essential for maintaining health and well-being. Pulse diagnosis is a unique, non-invasive method for determining the state of these doshas, which is considered reliable if it yields consistent results. The efficacy of pulse diagnostic procedures heavily depends on the practitioner's proficiency, skills, and experience. Although its long historical use has been seen as evidence of its efficacy, quantitative measurements of the reliability of this diagnostic method are still lacking. Ayurvedic practitioners place their fingers on the radial artery at the wrist to evaluate the pulse's rate, rhythm, strength, and quality. They observe different pulse attributes to draw an accurate picture of a patient's health. The pulse qualities detected under their three fingers enable the practitioner to determine the patient's constitutional type, with most people falling into one or two type categories and experiencing an imbalance that causes some degree of illness.
As you can see in this picture, so Ayurvedic pulse diagnosis and all other pulse diagnosis has a very similar commonality with the pulse diagnosis procedure. And this Ayurvedic procedure is almost identical with TCM. Just like TCM, these three positions represent different diagnoses. And just like any other pulse diagnosis, rate, rhythm, strength, and qualities were observed to make a better, complete diagnosis.
Pulse diagnosis in China. The origins of pulse diagnosis can be traced back to ancient Chinese medical texts, such as the Huangdi Neijing, which provided foundational theories about the connection between the pulse and the internal organs. The Shanghan Lun, compiled by Zhang Zhongjing, marked a significant milestone, incorporating pulse observations alongside other symptoms in its vivid depiction of clinical cases. Zhang Zhongjing demonstrated how pulse characteristics could be integrated with other diagnostic findings to guide treatment effectively. Early descriptions of the pulse were often fragmented and lacked a systematic framework. The establishment of a systematic framework for pulse diagnosis began with Wang Shuhe's Meijing during the Jin dynasty. Wang Shuhe built upon the pulse records in the Shanghan Lun and earlier works, generalizing the types of pulses and their diagnostic meanings. The Meijing is the earliest specialized text on pulse diagnosis and encapsulates nearly all pulse diagnosis theories before the Weijin period. Wang was the first to categorize and describe pulse conditions systematically, condensing them into 24 types: floating, hollow, surging, slippery, rapid, skipping, wiry, tight, deep, hidden, drumskin, full, faint, choppy, thin, moderate, weak, deficient, scattered, slow, knotted, intermittent, and large. The Meijing not only standardized pulse types, but also detailed the methods for pulse taking, including the Kunko method and the three-region 9-pulse system. Wang's work laid the foundation for all subsequent pulse diagnosis literature, which either elaborated on or slightly modified his categorization. In the Ming dynasty, Li Shizhen, renowned for his encyclopedic Benqiao Gangmu, further refined pulse diagnosis through his work Binhu Maishui. This concise yet influential text outlined 27 pulse types and their clinical relevance. Li Shizhen described each pulse in a poetic and vivid manner, as though painting a picture of its qualities. His depiction of the normal pulse is an example. It is like a single thread stretched on a loom but not tightly wound on its axis, with a pulse movement under the fingers that is peaceful, gentle, and extraordinarily even in its rhythm. It is also akin to the image of willow branches in early spring swaying gracefully in a soft breeze, as if the delicate wind lightly stirs the tips of the willow. These poetic descriptions not only made the text accessible, but also provided a standard for modern interpretations of pulse qualities. Li Shizhen, an empirically minded scholar, emphasized the importance of hands-on experience, reflecting his pragmatic approach to pulse diagnosis. Modern TCM's interpretation of the 28 pulses follows the descriptions found in both the Meijing and Binhu Maishui. While later texts made minor adjustments or elaborations, they retained the fundamental structure established by Wang Shuhe. Considering the fact that the Huangdi Neijing and the Meijing were written only about 200 years apart, and that the content of the Meijing has undergone little modification in later generations, Questions remain regarding how extensively its content was clinically validated.
So in this historical context, first, I want you to understand PERS diagnosis is not something exclusive to TCM. And think about this. Why Ayurvedic medicine and TCM maintain this diagnosis system while other medical systems abandoned it? Of course, nobody knows the right answer, but this is something we need to discuss in this class. There has been many criticism about PERS diagnosis even in China, and let's talk about those criticism.
In both Eastern and Western medicine, pulse diagnosis has been a mastery that is very difficult to achieve. For example, stories of indirect pulse diagnosis through thread have been passed down in both Persia and China. The efficacy of pulse diagnostic procedures heavily depends on the practitioner's proficiency, skills, and experience. And for this reason, it has been questioned whether it is truly an empirical and rational diagnostic method. This remains a highly controversial topic. Although its long historical use has been seen as evidence of its efficacy, the reliability of pulse diagnostic method are still questionable.
Probably ancient people were mystified by the pulsation of blood vessel, thinking it was directly linked to life. Of course, when they die, pulse stops. So I think those phenomena they observed gave enough inspiration to make a PERS diagnosis. So both in East and West, it was believed that blood vessel did not circulate but move in one direction. So blood was supposed to nourish our body, so not the circulation. Of course, not in biomedicine, but I'm talking about those ancient people. The Chinese considered the pulsation of this blood vessel as a movement qi. So they connected the PERS diagnosis and qi and also blood vessel, especially artery. And ancient Greek thought it was movement of pneuma. So pneuma and qi those are very similar concept. In the West, it was believed that arteries carried pneuma, while veins carries blood, which aligns with Chinese concept of jingmai and suimai, transporting blood. Greek people and Chinese people, they thought through the arteries, qi and pneuma travels, and through the vein, red blood travels. It's common in these days, people say spirit and wine, and that spirit has the same etymology with pneuma. So pneuma actually meant spirit, soul, and also air. So air, transparent air, travel artery, and qi travel through the artery, and red blood, wine, travel through your vein. That was how ancient Greek people and Chinese people believed a long time ago.
Galen suspected that the theory claimed by most physicians of Hippocrates' time, that arteries carry pneuma and veins carry blood, was based on observing empty arteries in dissected bodies. To prove this, Galen conducted a simple experiment. He tied both ends of an artery and showed that fresh blood flowed from the middle, proving that living arteries are never empty. This became a model for experimental physiology. Wang Qinggren's Yilin Gaikuo includes 35 illustrated anatomical plates. He observed bodies of the poor who had been attacked by dogs and people executed at execution grounds. Since he did not perform dissections himself, his anatomical descriptions contain many errors.
For example, he saw that arteries in the corpse were empty and concluded the arteries were passage for qi. This mistake is similar to those made by ancient Greek physicians like Hippocrates or Erasistratus. In TCM, the site of PERS diagnosis are where artery lies, such as carotid artery and mostly radial artery. Why TCM doctors measure movement of qi in blood vessel? Isn't it strange? Aren't they supposed to take a pulse right on meridians and channels, not blood vessel? The reason is simple. Early Chinese medical doctors, Chinese medicine did not distinguish between jingmai, qi passage, and suimai, blood passage. Originally, the word mai was used to describe blood vessel. So my diagnosis is a pulse diagnosis. But my actually meant blood vessel in early days. It was only expressed as arterial pulse. Take a look at the following description in Han Dynasty, 2000 years ago. They captured notorious robber and they killed him, and they dissected his body. In the procedure of dissection, this is described in detail. They measured 5 organs and also with a bamboo stick probed blood vessel, sticking the fine branches and separate blood vessel from his body. And they measured the distance and they observed how they traveled. And they said in the book, it is written in the book, this is my. Yes, where we take a pulse, my. We can cure all disease with this my. So this description clearly shows in ancient China, blood passage and qi passage was not differentiated yet. In the classic of Yellow Emperor, we can find similar passages. Qi conveys fluids and infuses them into mai. Mai is blood vessel and transforms them fluid into blood and nourish the extremities and internally nourish zhang and fu, 5 organs. From Ling Shu. So Neijing, Yellow Emperor's classic, and Ling Shu. So qi and fluid run through the mai and turns into blood. And 12 meridians, Jingmai, so this is meridian channel we say, and run through the flesh, but they are deep and cannot be seen. The only visible Jingmai channel where the acupuncture is located and pulse diagnosis taken is the tarsal vein. The only visible Jingmai channel. This is not talking about blood vessel, but channel and meridian. So it says, channel and meridian cannot be seen because it is located in depth. But the tarsal vein can be seen, can be observed with just simple visual inspection. Only this Jingmai is visible because there is nowhere to hide, very close to the skin. So Jingmai and tarsal vein considered as a same entity. So tarsal vein is one of the Jingmai. This is also from Ling Shu, Neijing, Yellow Emperor's classic.
This indicates that the ancients regarded blood vessels as Jingmai, Jingmo meridian. Over time, this distinction evolved. Thus, the practice of pulse diagnosis involved interpreting the movement of these vessels. Although this practice has developed over history, it is unclear who invented it and whether it has been adequately verified over 2,000 years. Compared to herbal medicine or acupuncture, which are relatively easier to validate, the objective verification of pulse diagnosis has undoubtedly been more challenging. Therefore, the debate over the effectiveness of pulse reading continues among many practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine today.
Yeah, even today. And there are many scholars and TCM doctors who criticize the effectiveness, efficacy of pulse diagnosis. First, Jeong Yak-yong. Jeong Yak-yong is a renowned Korean Confucian scholar. Joseon's Confucian scholars were also deeply knowledgeable with acupuncture and herbal medicine. He wrote Magnon. This is a book about the chapter about the pulse, and he discussed about pulse like the following. It is foolish to claim that left chun is the point, the specific location taking pulse in radial artery. So they divide into 3 different locations, chun, guan, qi. And they assigned, the TCM doctors assigned 5 organs and 6 fu on each location. And Jeong Yak-yong criticized that kind of system. Physician's finger varies in size, so do patient wrist. How can I know that what is called chun is not actually guan, or that what is called guan is not qi? So it is a very reasonable criticism. TCM assigned specific organs to 6 positions on a radial artery. It's difficult to explain with modern biological concept. This has been debated within traditional Chinese medicine for a long time. As a result, many modern practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine focus solely on pulse characteristics, without associating them with specific organs. Likewise, Jeongnagyung's criticism. Second, Yoshimasu Todo. Yoshimasu Todo is praised for freeing Japanese medicine from Chinese medicine, make it really apart, one of a kind, completing it by discarding the theoretical framework of Chinese medicine like 5 phases and yin and yang, something speculative, mysterious. He also abandoned pulse diagnosis too and emphasized abdominal diagnosis system. And third, Lee Jae-ma. Lee Jae-ma is also doctor in Joseon and also Confucian scholar. And he invented Korean constitutional medicine, which is called Sasang medicine. Lee Jae-ma argued that pulse diagnosis has become overly complicated and mere formality. He particularly criticized mystical diagnostic methods such as diagnosing specific organs based on specific pulse location, just like what Jeongnagyung said, and emphasized just need to grasp only basic principle of pulse diagnosis like floating and deep and the rate, fast and slow or strong and weak, those basic principles. Pulse diagnosis is just one method of identifying symptoms. Its principle lies in floating, sinking, slow, and rapid pulses. There is no need to investigate its mysterious aspect. And Shu Dan-chun in Qing Dynasty. He is also a very famous doctor, TCM doctor in Qing Dynasty. He was critical of medical practice after Song Dynasty, complicated and speculative. As a clinician with rich experience, Shaw provided practical opinions. One of them is pulse diagnosis. So he criticized the excessive reliance on pulse diagnosis, warning against deceiving people by diagnosing disease solely based on pulse readings. Wang Qingnan is also a famous doctor in Qing Dynasty. He also criticized pulse diagnosis system in his book Correction on Errors of Medical Work. He argued that many pulse descriptions were too vague and subjective, leading to inconsistent diagnosis.
These practitioners of traditional Chinese medicine, or scholars, lived during the era of practical learning in modern times. Yoshimasu Todo was active during the late Edo period, Shu Da-chun during the Qing dynasty, a time when Chinese medicine was greatly influenced by Western culture and empirical scholarship was popular. Jae-ma Lee and Dasan Jong Yak-yong were active in late Joseon Korea, a period when this empirical approach to scholarship became popular later compared to China and Japan. Therefore, we can see that the criticism of pulse diagnosis occurred relatively recently.
Okay then, is the pulse diagnosis useless and meaningless? I personally share same opinion as Lee Jae-ma or Jeongnagyung regarding the pulse diagnosis. While there is no need to enter mystical realm, but I still believe pulse diagnosis is the essential part of acupuncture and herbal medicine.
The meaning of pulse diagnosis. Many of you say pulse diagnosis is too subjective, but it's precisely in this subjective aspect that its importance lies. Why did people in the past perform pulse diagnosis? Oriental diagnosis doesn't dissect like Western medicine, but observes the whole. What do AHM doctors observe in the whole? AHM doctors observe movement. How one walks, how one breathes, how one talks. Movement is changes, and changes tell a story. Do you remember I Ching? I Ching is a story about changes, and AHM doctors applied the theories in I Ching to the human body. Therefore, observing changes, movement, in humans is an essential part of AHM diagnosis. AHM doctors can comprehensively judge whether it's normal or not. In fact, if one stays still, there's no change, right? There's nothing to judge. Even in investigations, if a suspect doesn't say anything, ultimately no judgment can be made. It's the same with patients. But imagine a patient who has fainted or is in a coma showing no changes. They can't speak or move, so we can't observe any changes. However, even at that moment, the pulse is moving. If they're not dead, the pulse will be beating. Perhaps ancient Chinese doctors tried to determine whether a person would live or die, how critical their condition was, by feeling the pulse in such desperate situations. When the pulse stops, the patient's life ends. How important would that be? They would have recorded the subtle changes between the state of death and the normal pulse state. I mentioned earlier that pulse diagnosis is more important because it's subjective. Let me explain with an analogy. If you're not married, think about this. Let's say a matchmaking company made a perfect 200-page report on your potential spouse's personality, hobbies, food preferences, and background. Can you marry based on that scientific data alone? Everything is known, including full body photos and medical records. No matter what, I don't think I could marry without meeting the person. Conversely, if I meet that person and talk for even an hour, I might think this is my person without that 200-page information. What would you think if a doctor judged your condition and made all prescriptions and treatment plans just by looking at your blood tests, X-rays, or MRIs? Shouldn't that doctor meet you? When people meet, they form some subjective thoughts and feelings. Those subjective feelings are probably aspects that can't be captured in photos or tests. You are more than what can be expressed in pictures or numbers. Maybe diseases can be judged by objective data only, but humans cannot be. The biggest problem with modern Western medicine is that it breaks down the medical process reductionistically, subdivides it, and doesn't look at the whole person. The broken down individual information may seem very scientific, but it's not the truth that can explain the whole. I'm not saying that such subjective, intuitive areas are unconditionally important. I'm saying that when diagnosing patients, objective information, fragmented analysis, along with insight that encompasses the whole, and subjective intuition are all important. Pulse diagnosis is one of the ways AHM doctors communicate with patients subjectively and intuitively. Through pulse diagnosis, we can feel the patient's movement, the patient's changes even in the most extreme moments. Pulse diagnosis can thus be described as a process of feeling the patient's energy. Whether you call it energy or qi in AHM, it's the same thing. Pulse diagnosis is the process of feeling how strong or weak, fast or slow the patient's energy or qi is. It's the same process whether you feel it by looking at the gait, listening to the voice, or feeling pulse diagnosis, movement of blood. So conversely, I don't think pulse diagnosis is an overly mysterious or complicated process. I think it's nonsense to detect pregnancy or find cancer through pulse diagnosis. However, there is common information that pulse diagnosis can clearly provide.
Just as we talk to someone and form an impression of them, if you observe the pulse, it becomes a mean to know more about the people, patient, or disease. Also, it is absurd to diagnose based on only pulse diagnosis alone. AHM diagnosis is usually divided into process of looking, listening, asking, and touching. Among these, touching or pulse diagnosis is the last procedure. I learned in the school that pulse diagnosis is the most important, but the last. What it means is, it's used for final confirmation after everything is done. So it is just part of whole diagnosis. All other diagnosis process are important. Everything is essential. Pulse diagnosis is just one of them. Acupuncture herbal medicine is an act of seeing the whole landscape. It's not about diagnosing pregnancy based only on a pulse. It's certainly a wrong tradition to use these as something to boast about their skills or as a just formality, perhaps to show off skills by doing just pulse diagnosis and guessing something. My point is that while pulse taking is not omnipotent, but it is still useful and I would say essential. So today we discussed the historical context of pulse diagnosis. So pulse diagnosis is not something exclusive in TCM, but in many medical traditions in all over the world have similar tradition too. And also pulse diagnosis has been always controversial in medical history, even in China. So based on this context, I hope you get some insight for the future. So how do we accept pulse diagnosis? How do we need to study pulse diagnosis? How important or how decisive those pulse diagnosis system? And how can we develop pulse diagnosis in the future? One of the most important reasons of studying history is for the future. Think about future of pulse diagnosis.